Hey guys, it's Timothy here. For a while now, I've been wanting to make some EDH content for my channel since I play EDH about as much as I play Limited. For my first foray into EDH content, I'll be looking at 10 board wipes in EDH that I consider quite good, but never seem to encounter during games. Before we start off our list, let's make a couple things clear. This is not a list of the 10 most powerful board wipes in EDH or anything along those lines. We've all seen our fair share of Psych Rifts, Blasphemous Acts, Discs, and so forth. Board wipes are a pivotal and crucial part of EDH games, and naturally people tend to flock to the most powerful options. However, my purpose with this list is to show off some of the more interesting board wipes for players who are looking for something out of the ordinary. If you're looking for a more unconventional way to clear the board, try some of the cards on this list. Number 1. You'll notice from my very first pick that I have a tendency towards splashy, mana-intensive cards in EDH. As such, many of the cards on this list will have high converted mana costs in exchange for some sort of extra advantage above just clearing creatures off the board. First up is Bright Flame, an X spell that has the potential to clear most creatures off the board while also gaining an absurd amount of life. Let's talk downside though. This is a targeted board wipe, meaning it can fizzle if the targeted creature is removed in response. Also, Radiance is a color-specific mechanic, meaning there's some finickiness to what creatures will actually be affected. Aside from these factors, when you consider how much life you can gain off of a huge board of creatures, as well as the fact that this could well be a one-sided board wipe against monocolored opponents, you end up with a risky but powerful board wipe that rivals cards like Fumigate in terms of power level. My favorite commander to slot Bright Flame into is Kainos Intiro, a 4-color commander that tends to have plenty of mana and which can use Bright Flame to destroy all but artifact and black creatures. It's also worth mentioning that Bright Flame plays exceptionally well with Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight, but honestly, what doesn't play well with her? Number 2. Alright, Board of the Gods is one of my least favorite sets overall, but one of the hidden gems from the set is Fated Retribution, a white instant speed board wipe with a generally underwhelming Fated cycle. Instant is the key word here. When we look at a highly played board wipe like Ingaruk's Wake, we obviously know we're going to get our value out of the card and usually end up in a favorable board position, but the fact that you're doing this at sorcery speed usually means your turn is over after casting the spell. In the case of Fated Retribution, you get instant speed creature removal, as well as something that doesn't show up often, instant speed mass planeswalker removal. Being able to leave up mana for a board wipe during an opponent's turn has its attractions, but being able to sweep up all planeswalkers in addition to this leads me to believe Fated Retribution stronger than people give it credit for. If you're going to play a card like Route, why not kill off all planeswalkers too? A triple white mana cost can be awkward for some decks, and the Scry 2 is often negligible, but I urge people to try this card out if they're looking for a far-reaching board wipe. Number 3. Conspiracy cards. Number 3 on this list is the only artifact I've included, and certainly not the best option if you're looking for pure destructive power, but Coercive Portal offers a decision-making process that I find fun and skill testing. For those who don't know, the portal triggers on your upkeep and requires all players to vote for one of two options. If the majority of players chooses so, or in the case of a tie, you simply draw an extra card that turn, which is a sweet downside if you ask me. However, if the majority of players have had enough with the board, they can vote Carnage, which essentially destroys all non-lands on the field, including the portal itself. Coercive Portal fluctuates between a card advantage engine and a possible wrath depending on the board state, and the voting mechanic always leads to interesting political strategy. If you're looking for more control over your artifact board wipes, you can stick to more consistent cards like Nev's Disc or Perilous Vault, but I personally love the decision making that goes into Coercive Portal, and I love how it causes your opponents to be careful of how much they commit to the board. Number 4. In EDH, there's a whole subset of board wipes that destroy all creatures and attempts to leave you in a winning position by putting a creature on the board. One of my personal favorites in this category is Necromantic Selection. For triple black and 7 mana total, you get to wrath the board, but more importantly, you get to take one of the destroyed creatures and put it back on the battlefield. This plays similarly to cards like Phyrexian Rebirth, Surge of Tentacles, or Deathbringer Regent, which all leave you with a creature after you board wipe, but the problem with those cards is that the card you're left with is often some large vanilla creature that's likely to be an immediate target. The advantage of Necromantic Selection is that you often end up with a real creature on board, either reusing an enter the battlefield trigger, or just reanimate an potent threat. You can even use this card as a way to essentially have your commander survive a board wipe, choosing them as a creature to reanimate once the board is cleared. In this regard, Necromantic Selection plays similarly to Dune Blast, but with a less restrictive color requirement and the potential to steal a powerful creature from your opponent. Number 5. Apparently, I'm a huge fan of 7 mana board wipes, but expensive or not, a list of mass creature removal spells would not be complete without a mono red card. Aside from the more ubiquitous red board wipes like Blasphemous Act and Chain Reaction, I tend to think Volcanic Vision deserves more love than it gets. Return an instant or sorcery in your graveyard to your hand and hit all of your opponent's creatures equal to that card's converted mana cost. Not only are you drawing a card, and usually a good one, but you also get an advantage of knowing that Volcanic Vision doesn't hit your own creatures, only your opponent's. In my opinions, this is one of the best board wipes you can run in a Spells Matters deck. Commanders like Mizzix, Niv-Mizzet, and Melik can all take advantage of the visions itself as well as the card you return to your hand. One of my favorite things to do with this card is return an expensive Delve card to your hand. Few things feel better than delving a Dig Through Time or Treasure Cruise, then returning that card to your hand and obliterating your opponent's boards at the same time. Number 6. Shadowmoor is a weird set, and it follows that Shadowmoor has some weird cards. Allow me to introduce a pet card of mine, World Purge. Thankfully, the kind people in control of the EDH ban list have never allowed Upheaval to destroy the hopes and dreams of Commander players. So for those players who want to come as close as they can to experiencing what an Upheaval feels like, we have World Purge at the top of the line in janky Commander board wipes. Sometimes you need a reset button to stand a chance in the game, and World Purge is the epitome of a reset button, forcing all players to scoop up all of their permanents, even lands, and shuffle all but 7 of them back into the library. Now, World Purge doesn't interact with the graveyard and doesn't change life totals, so there's some extra shenanigans to be had there, and it also prevents players from floating a ton of mana before resolving the spell, so it literally resets the game to a point where you can hope to establish a dominant board presence before your opponents. You know, kind of like every game of Magic. Honestly, I included this card on the list mostly for its insane combo potential with Eerie Interlude and Ghostway, cards that can flicker your board until the end step, allowing them to essentially survive the Purge. Nobody knows this card exists, nobody plays it, so use that to your advantage. Number 7. Alright, for the sake of diversity, I wanted to find a green board wipe to include on this list, which is not something green does well or often. However, I've been impressed the few number of times I've come across an opponent playing the Great Aurora. For 9 mana, yes, 9 mana total, each player shuffles all cards in their hand and each permanent they control into their libraries, draws that many cards, and puts as many lands from their new hand as they can onto the battlefield. There's some real variance with the way this card plays out, but the great part is that the lands come in untapped, meaning you now have a new hand and hopefully a decent amount of mana to cast some spells and get ahead of your opponents. Also, unlike World Purge, you can float mana before casting the Great Aurora and use any leftover mana towards your new hand. If you're looking for something a little less random, you can always play Azuri's Predation, which is certainly not underplayed, but also isn't as interesting. The Great Aurora reminds me of Warp World, but unlike that mess of a card, the Aurora doesn't put non-land permanents on the battlefield, meaning it's highly unlikely you'll Aurora your opponents into a ridiculous board state, which sometimes happens with Warp World. Number 8. Number 8 on this list is actually the only creature I've included. Putting a board wipe ability on a creature leads to some potential for repeated abuse, especially in a reanimator-based graveyard deck. False Prophet is a card I rarely play against, but groan every time I see it. When he dies, all creatures are exiled, and note that since False Prophet has to go to the graveyard to trigger, he avoids being exiled himself. The stats are small enough that he threatens to trade with anything that attacks you, and combining False Prophet with a sacrifice outlet leads to an easy board wipe. Needless to say, exile and board wipes are that much more efficient than simply destroying all creatures, and you could surely play something like Descend Upon the Sinful or Final Judgment, but as mentioned, False Prophet is a creature, and creatures are easier to recur or take advantage of. Combine this with common Raise Dead effects like Palace Siege, and you leave creature-based decks in a very tough position. Number 9. I'll level with you on this one. Killing Wave is not necessarily an incredibly powerful card, and also gives your opponents options, which is never exciting. And on top of that, the card affects your creatures too. But with all that being said, I've included Killing Wave for its combo potential with certain commanders. One such commander is Mazarek, a creature that thrives off of other permanents being sacrificed. Obviously, it's a little bit of a non-bow to try and build a large board of creatures to get Mazarek's +1/+1 counters, but with a nice life cushion and enough sacrifices out of your opponents, you can still win with a well-timed Killing Wave. Other life gain decks with commanders like Oloro and Ailey, Eternal Pilgrim, can easily pay the life requirement to keep their own creatures around, while your opponents have to struggle with either losing some of their creatures or a reasonably large amount of life. Again, I want to stress that Killing Wave is not a ubiquitously powerful card, but I like that your opponents must lose something regardless of what decision they make. Number 10. The final card on my list is, in my opinion, the most blatantly powerful card included on this entire list. And honestly, as powerful as the card is, I find it interesting that players don't play it more often. Tragic Arrogance gives a player the ability to reduce each player's board to just one artifact, enchantment, creature, and planeswalker. We've seen this effect repeated very recently with Cataclysmic Gearhulk, but unlike the Kaladesh construct, when you cast a Tragic Arrogance, you have complete control over what gets sacrificed and what stays behind. This can devastate a wide variety of playstyles, including token-based strategies, Tool for enchantment decks, artifact decks in general, as well as the occasional Super Friends deck. On top of this, Tragic Arrogance causes cards to be sacrificed, meaning Indestructible won't save you, and the card doesn't target, meaning that Hexproof and Shroud can't stop it. Add to this the fact that you can select things like Artifact Creatures as the chosen card for multiple card types, and you can extend how much damage Tragic Arrogance can do. Sure, it affects you too, but you control what gets left behind, and the card has some insane combo potential with things like Faith's Reward. The card is devastating and deserves to see more play than it currently does. Well, guys, that's going to do it for my list. I'd love to hear what you think of these cards, and I'd also love to hear what underplayed board wipes you like to surprise people with. Leave a comment below to let me know, and if you have any ideas for EDH videos you'd like for me to make, let me hear about that too. So, as always, my name's Timothy. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next.